Good evening. My internet is uploading. BT fixed it, sorted it, and it's okay. And they gave me advice as well while they were here. If you're uploading to YouTube, apparently it's a good idea if you upload when you're in Great Britain in the mornings, because there's less Americans on the internet. They're 5 hours behind us. So I've been in a habit of uploading late in the day, and that's why it's been so slow. I'm talking over an hour and 40 minutes to upload a not terribly long video. So now that I might record the day before, unless it's readings of the masses for that day, and upload them the next day. So I'm actually going to record now. Salvation is from the Jews, part 2 of chapter 6, and if I've got time and energy, I'll record the first part of chapter 7, because that's also long and it looks like it might go to 2 parts. So then I'll hopefully upload that tomorrow. Is Ash Wednesday. I'm not going to be around during the day. I'm going to church at 10 a.m, which is early for me, and then going to see a priest friend in my hometown and have some prayer sharing and confession and those sort of things, and then come home, and then I'll probably do the mass readings if I haven't done them early in the morning, which I very much doubt I will. And then Thursday I should be back to my normal recording and uploading, but Friday I'm going to my hometown in the day to stay at the equivalent of here for one night in the guest room for a Latin Mass on Saturday. So I won't be doing as many recordings on Friday and Saturday, and back to normal on Sunday because I have time after church. So now I'm going to just say 1 or 2 prayers before I begin the reading. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here, ever this night be at my side, to light, to guard, to rule and guide. Amen. Prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in the day of battle. Be our safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do you, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the other evil spirits who prowl through the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. So now going to go to where I left off. Salvation is from the Jews, ideological foundation of Nazism. I stopped on page 197 and I will continue from page 197. There is no heading, it's just the next paragraph. And the first part is already up there. The fundamental situation is succinctly summarized by St. Paul. For we are not contending against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Ephesians 6 and 12. And that's as relevant as today as when the Nazis were doing all their stuff. So we're still in those times. Nothing has changed. In examining the ideological roots of Nazism, the economy of perdition can be observed at close hand. The adversary draws men into sin by appealing to their vices, pride, desire for power, lust, and so forth. He draws them deeper and deeper toward him and away from God by drawing them more and more deeply into sin. In this case, sins against chastity, sexual perversion, sadism, and murder. His power over them as individuals increases as they become more and more debauched in sin. Their ability to reason and even their basic sanity dissolves away as his influence over their minds increases. We're talking about the Nazis and the German, what was going on there in the early 1930s. Their morality spirals downward, leading both to greater and greater cruelty and sadism, and also to greater and greater sexual degeneracy. They abandon anything resembling true religion, replacing it with idolatry, occultism, or outright Satanism. This is happening now to a greater degree than then, particularly in America. As they become involved with the occult, their thinking drifts further and further away from what we would think of as a sane worldview. And over time, once rational individuals become willing to accept the most bizarre ideas as facts. All of this we see in the development of the Nazis. Again, in the words of St. Paul, they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God, excuse me a moment, for images resembling mortal man or birds or animals or reptiles. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonouring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. Excuse me, I've got trouble with my nose. Sorry, this is a plague. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonourable passions. Their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in their own persons the due penalty for their error. Romans 1:21-27. Excuse me, please. A huge portal was opened up to hell, and a 4-lane highway on which 18-wheelers carrying a demonic import-export traffic sped back and forth in one direction. The Nazis, feeding the forces of hell with their cruelty, their murder, their occult rites, worship and practices, their idolatry in the other direction, hell feeding them with power, excitement, inspiration, lust, and success in their malevolent undertakings. For just as God gives spiritual consolations and the fruits of the Holy Spirit to those who serve him, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Galatians 5:22-23. The evil one rewards his servants with demonic counterfeits of these: lust, excitement, power, passion, an iron will, and so forth. And as the Holy Spirit allows his followers to share in the charismatic gifts for the common good, gifts such as wisdom, knowledge, healing, prophecy, and so forth. 1 Corinthians 12. The evil spirit has counterfeits of these too, that he gives to his servants: occult abilities and powers, clairvoyance, the ability to overpower the will of others, extraordinary strength, Machiavellian cleverness, and so forth. It is this exchange that we will now examine. It is the explanation for the central role that occultism, sadism, sexual perversion, and murder played in the story of the Third Reich. One should always, however, remember, in viewing history, as the interaction between the economy of salvation and the economy of perdition, that the economy of perdition itself is a part of God's mysterious providence and is encompassed by the economy of salvation. God does not will evil, yet mysteriously the adversary of man's salvation himself was created by God and is sustained in existence entirely by God's sovereign will to serve his purpose, which is goodness itself. Although at times evil may appear to gain the upper hand, absolutely everything that God allows to happen works together for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8, verse 28. The next title in the book, Theosophy. The discussion on which we are about to embark is of necessity somewhat lengthy, since it covers the development of occult racious theory over the course of some 50 years, culminating in the neo-pagan pseudo-religion of the Nazis. Each link in this chain exhibits a virulent hatred of Jews, and Judaism, and a complete adoption of a pagan, Gnostic, New Age type religion. Each enthusiastically embraces a morality of unbridled and perverted sexual license. Each has total contempt for the dignity, freedom, or sanctity of the individual. Not surprisingly, since all of these philosophies and values are antithetical to Christianity, they all also exhibit nothing but contempt for Christianity, Christians, and Christian morality, and look forward to the demise of Christianity. The first link in this chain was Madame Blavatsky with her version of occultism known as Theosophy. Blavatsky was born in Russia of German parents in 1831. At 16, she married a much older man, but after a few weeks she left him and spent the next 20 years travelling the world, spending time in Turkey, Egypt, Greece, Europe, North and South America, India, and Tibet. She claimed to have received the occult doctrines that became the basis of Theosophy during 7 years she spent in Tibet studying under Hindu Mahatmas masters. In 1888, she published some of these doctrines in The Secret Doctrine, from which the following passages are extracted, and I'm going to read them now. But before I read that, I'll give the footnote. Helena P. Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrine, Theosophical University Press, electronic version, and it's all in the book here, published in 2 volumes in 1888. The myth is that long ago there was an island in the Atlantic named Atlantis, which was home to a very advanced civilization and which later sank into the ocean and disappeared. So we've got the footnote out of the way. Now I'm going to read the extract. This is hers. The human races are born one from the other, grow, develop, become old, and die. Their sub-races and nations follow the same rule. Since the beginning of the Atlantean race, many million years have passed. Yet we find the last of the Atlanteans still mix up with the Aryan element 11,000 years ago. This shows the enormous overlapping of one race over the race which succeeds it. Occult philosophy teaches that even now, under our very eyes, the new race and races are preparing to be formed. In about 25,000 years, the 6th root race will have appeared on the stage of our round. As they increase and their numbers become, with every age greater, one day they will awake to to find themselves in a majority. It is the present men who will then begin to be regarded as exceptional mongrels until these die out in their turn. There will be no more Americans when the sixth race commences to sow the seeds for a forthcoming grander and far more glorious race than any of those we know of at present. The cycles of matter will be succeeded by cycles of spirituality and a fully developed mind on the law of parallel history and races. The majority of the future mankind will be composed of glorious adepts. Humanity is the child of cyclic destiny. Thus will mankind, race after race, perform its appointed cycle pilgrimage each year after the other, dropping one sub-race, but only to beget another higher race on the ascending cycle, while a series of other less favoured groups, the failures of nature, will, like some individual men, vanish from the human family without even leaving a trace behind. And I'll do the footnote before I read the next bit about this woman. Blavatsky, Secret Doctrine. Many of her followers today are probably unaware of the more overtly racist aspects of her teachings. The Aristophists were an offshoot of the Theosophical Society with a particular interest in Aryan race theory, Aryan theosophy, Aristophy. I'll continue reading about this woman. During her lifetime, Helen P. Blavatsky, of otherwise intelligent, educated people, accepted her bizarre pseudoscience as authoritative, as many still do today. Her race theory, further developed by later Ariosophists, held that Aryans are a superior race, descended from priests of Atlantis, and pigs can fly, who escaped before it sank into the sea, who then migrated to India, where they became the Hindu Aryans, the Brahmins. I actually don't like reading this, but it's in the book. I have to read it. This superior race degenerated with the dilution of its pure blood by intermarriage with baser races, but can be restored to its former superhuman splendour and powers by careful selected breeding to restore the bloodlines to their former purity. Excuse me a moment. I really dislike what I'm reading. I hate this sort of thing, but I have to read it. We'll come to the point at the end of all this. Blavatsky's pseudoscience incorporated her undisguised contempt for Jews and Judaism. The Semitic languages are the bastard descendants of the first phonetic corruptions of the eldest children of the early Sanskrit. The Semites, especially the Arabs, are later Aryans, degenerate in spirituality and perfected in materiality. To these belong all the Jews and the Arabs. She's lumped them all together. They're totally different. The former are a tribe descended from the Chandalas of India, the outcasts, many of them ex-Brahmins who sought refuge in Chaldea, in Sindh and Arya, Iran, Persia, and were truly born from their father Abram, no Brahmin, some 8,000 years before Christ. The Semite interpretations about God emanated from and were preeminently those of a small tribe, thus marking its national features and the idiosyncratic defects that characterize many of the Jews to this day: gross realism, selfishness, and sensuality. I actually find what I'm reading is offensive. It really, I'm sorry. I find it totally offensive. The Jews' inferiority, this is all her opinions, is contrasted to the Aryan superiority. With the Hindu Aryan, the most metaphysical and spiritual people on earth, religion has ever been, in his words, an everlasting lodestar that beams the brighter in the heavens, the darker here on earth grows the night around him. For the Israelites, religion is a wise, prudential feeling grounded on mere calculation, and it was so from its beginning. Having burdened themselves with it, Christian nations feel bound to defend and poetize it at the expense of all other religions. How off they are, how off they are. The Aryan Hindu belongs to the oldest races now on earth. The Semite Hebrew to the latest. One is nearly 1 million years old. The other is a small sub-race, some 8,000 years old and no more. There was a day when the Israelites had beliefs as pure as the Aryans have. But now, Judaism, built solely on phallic worship, has become one of the latest creeds in Asia, and theologically a religion of hate and malice towards everyone and everything outside themselves. This is how this woman thought of them. Goodness me, Blavatsky. I've lost my place because it's so horrible what I'm reading. Philo-Judaeus shows what was the genuine Hebrew faith. This is this woman's, same woman's words. The sacred writings, he says, prescribe what we ought to do, commanding us to hate the heathen and their laws and institutions. It is with the Talmudic Jews that the grand symbols of nature were the most profane. This is Blatt, what strange name she's got. Her Blavatsky. This is all what she thinks. The sacred writing, he says, prescribe what we ought to do, commanding us to hate the heathen and their laws and institutions. It is with the Talmudic Jews that the grand symbols of nature were the most profound, and by them applied to conceal the most terrestrial and grossly sexual mysteries, wherein both deity and religion were degraded. So they put italics in the original. According to Blavatsky, this is the woman again, the God of Judaism, Jehovah, is no more than a phallic symbol invented by the Jews, in the know to dupe the ignorant mass of Jews. The typical Gnostic distinction between the knowers and the ignorami. Presumably she means ignoramus. For how could those who invented the stupendous scheme now known as the Bible, is known as a scheme, or their successors, who knew, as all Kabbalists do, that it was so invented for a popular blind? How could they, we ask, feel reverence for such a phallic symbol? As Jehovah is shown most undeniably to be in the Kabbalistic works. How could anyone worthy of the name of a philosopher, and knowing the real secret meaning of their pillar of Jacob, their Bethel, oil-anointed Phalli, and their brazen serpent, worship such a gross symbol and minister unto it, seeing in it their covenant, the Lord himself? Well, this is heretical right through, isn't it? We know from the Jewish records that the ark contained a table of stone. That stone was phallic, according to Madame Blavatsky's theory. Yeah. So, and yet identical with the sacred name Jehovah. And there's italics in this. The swastika figured prominently in Blavatsky's Theosophy, appearing on the seal of the society, on her personal emblem, and on the cover of the secret doctrine. It then became a dominant symbol for all of the other occult, all this has been occult, groups that follow in this discussion, before finally being adopted by the Nazis. You see how evil calls good evil and evil good in this, or what I've been reading? Tragically, Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy is still with us today, both in its original form and in the enormous influence it has had throughout the New Age movement, which hasn't gone away. They're there only underground. Her influence, even now, is universally acknowledged by writers both inside and outside the movement. First time I've ever heard of her. I don't want to hear her again either, as the following quotes from recent publications demonstrate. I'll do the footnote at the bottom before I read the next paragraph. Madame Blavatsky considered the swastika to be the emblem of the Aryan root race. In reality, it is found in culture throughout the world with various meanings. The word itself comes from Sanskrit and means roughly good fortune. Robert S. Elwood and Harry B. Partin, Religious and Spiritual Groups in Modern America, 1988. So I'll go back to read what I didn't read. Theosophy occupies a central place in the history of new spiritual movements. For the writings of Blavatsky and some of her followers have had a great influence outside of her organization. The importance of Theosophy in modern history should not be underestimated. Madame Blavatsky stands out as the fountainhead of modern occult thought, and was either the originator and or popularizer of many of the ideas and terms which have a century later been assembled within the New Age movement. The Theosophical Society, which she co-founded, has been the major advocate of occult philosophy in the West, and the single most important avenue of Eastern teaching to the West. Madame Blavatsky may be credited with having set the style for modern occult literature. Guido list Armenen and Wotanism. And at the bottom, J. Gordon Melton, Jerome Clark and Aidan A. Kelly, New Age Almanac, Theodore Roszak, Unfinished Animal, The Aquarian Frontier and the Evolution of Consciousness, Harper and Row. The list added an aristocratic von to his name around 1903. So here is the Guido list, Armenen and Wotanism. It was Guido list 1848 to 1919. An Austrian mystic who developed Blavatsky's theosophy into the direct occult precursor of Nazism. He blended theosophy with his own revelations, with the occult use of the old Germanic runes and other occult practices, and with his version of ancient Germanic paganism, and came up with an occult sect that he called the Armenian Order. Armenschrechash, I can't pronounce German, which worshipped the Norse god, Norse, N-O-R-S-E, god Wotan, W-O-T-A-N. He claimed that the religion and its practices had been revealed to him in visions, from the devil, relying on the use of pagan rites that involved the shedding of blood, and reportedly incorporating degenerate sexual practices. It was in fact a form of Satanism in Teutonic guise. List developed as an elaborate occult science of the meaning and use of runes, including the double sig rune, later adopted as the emblem of the, wait for it, SS, the double lightning bolts, and the swastika, which he called the holy secret of constant regeneration. He taught that the Aryans were the race of upward spiritual evolution, and that in the future only Aryans would be citizens, and there would be strict laws to maintain the purity of the blood. Aryans would be relieved of all wage labour and demeaning tasks in order to rule as an exalted elite over the slave castes of non-Aryan peoples. According to the list, the Wotanist religion had flourished for millennia until Christianity had been imposed by force by the wicked Charlemagne, the slaughterer of the Saxons. To list the imposition of Christianity was a vicious assault in which the Vicar of God induced stupidity and ruled over a shamefully demoralized people that was almost ignorant of its nationality. The conventional history of German people was the result of a Christian conspiracy to obliterate all knowledge of their glorious Wotanist past. Lists ancient Teutonic Wotanism was a Gnostic nature worship with many elements familiar from the current New Age sects. It stressed the mystical union of a man with the universe, as well as his ability to obtain occult powers. The universe is in a ceaseless repetitive process of birth, death, rebirth. Nature contains an immanent God. All things are an emanation of a primal spiritual force. Man is an integral part of this unified cosmos and must therefore live in accord with nature. He followed the teachings of Theosophy on the evolution of the root races and the origin of the superior races from the now sunken back to Atlantis. Despite the absurdity of Liszt's claims, he had such great support in the higher echelons of Austrian society that when he was censored for improperly adding an aristocratic von to his name, Austria's Minister for Culture and Education sprang to his defence and demanded an apology in Parliament. And there's a book thing, Nicholas Goodrich Clark, The Occult Roots of Nazism, 1992, Guido List, Dutch Mythologicals, it's all in German. So there are books, but I wouldn't want to read any of them. This is hard enough. It's not pleasant reading this, I can tell you. I don't like reading occult stuff. When the List Society was founded in 1905 to promulgate his ideas, among the 50 initial supporters were the mayor of Vienna, editors of a number of popular newspapers and magazines, and the founder of a theatre, as well as other prominent citizens. With the support offered by the society, Liszt continued to publish his occult and pseudo-historical research and gained an international reputation, probably of all like-minded Satanists. His work was taken up in academic institutions and by other authors. Early in his life, Hitler was a follower of Liszt and probably even a formal member of his occult, Armenschaft, which I can't pronounce, judging by the fact that one of the books confiscated from Hitler's personal library after the war was inscribed by another Armenschaft member, to Adolf Hitler, my dear Armamen brother. Liszt died in 1919, but his teachings survived. In his writings, in his disciples, in the organizations he left behind and their offshoots, and tragically, in the fulfillment of his most disturbing prophecy, in which he had predicted the emergence of a benevolent dictatorial messianic figure who would emerge to save the Germans from the social problems of the day. Goodrich Clark, Occult Roots of Nazism. The book was inscribed by Dr. Babette Steininger, an early Nazi party member. So, go back to here. The ideal German world, as it existed before it was undermined by a conspiracy of inferior, non-Germanic peoples, the Church, the capitalists, the Jews, would be restored by a new aristocracy under a God-sent Saviour, who would fulfill the religious and political expectations of the oppressed. An ostensibly superhuman individual would end all human factions and confusion with the establishment of an eternal order. From his calculations based on cosmic and astrological laws, list favoured for the year 1932 as the time when a divine force, evil if you ask me, would possess the collective unconsciousness of the German people and usher in the new age. Order, national revenge and fervour would then transform modern pluralist society into a monolithic, eternal and incorruptible state in his anticipation of Nazi Germany. His calculation was only 1 year out. Doesn't that make it scary? See, it was evil spirituality. But you see, fallen angels have the powers that they were created with. They don't lose them. They're just going to go to hell at the end of time. So the next title is Lance and Ostara. One of the list's early disciples was Adolf Lance, 1874 to 1954, who gave himself the Aristotelic name Georg Lance von Liebenfels. After 6 years in a Cistercian monastery, he was expelled in 1899 for carnal and worldly desires. He then settled in Vienna, where he further developed Liszt's ideas and founded his own occult society, styled after a religious order, the Order of the New Temple, with the aim of re-establishing the purity of the Aryan race. He published his ideas in his virulently anti-Semitic, occult and erotic journal, Ostara, and in a book entitled Theozoology, or the Law of the Sodom Apellings and the Lectron of the Gods. Lance claimed that the Jews and the Pygmies were degenerate races that had resulted from interbreeding between the once superhuman Aryan race and animals. The Jews were demonic beast men who oppress us from above, slaughtering without conscience millions of people in murderous wars waged for their own personal gain. He taught that the ancient Aryans had extrasensory organs for the transmission and reception of electrical signals. Oh, this is getting daft. Sorry. This is getting dafter by the minute. It's okay if I'm reading it to myself, but I'm reading it to all of you. It's just ridiculous. Which gave them powers of telepathy and omniscience. These organs had atrophied into the useless pituitary and pineal glands of modern man due to crossbreeding of the god men with the beast men. I'm sorry, and I can't edit. Oh Lord have mercy, I can't believe what I'm reading. The inferior races, particularly the Jews, I'm crying with laughter. I'm so sorry. I do apologise, but I can't help it. This is the most ridiculous chapter I've read in any book ever. I'll have to start again this bit. The inferior races particularly the Jews, should be gotten rid of by methods including forced sterilization and castration, deportation, incineration as a sacrifice to God, and enslavement, and the Aryan population enhanced by keeping Aryan broodmothers in eugenic convents, serviced by Aryan stud males. All of these recommendations were later implemented by the Nazis. Please forgive me for laughing, but I've never read such nonsense in all my life. And if this is what began Nazism, I mean, they're sick in their head, totally sick. I better read on, but I'm crying at the same time as laughing because it's just so dreadful. I can't believe what I'm reading here. But the facts are facts. I mean, the facts are always... Well, let me just read on. Judaism was not the only religion that attracted Lanz's contempt. In his Theozoology, he writes that the Passion of Christ was the attempted rape of Christ by pygmies, urged on by the disciples of satanic bestiality cults devoted to interbreeding. Well, whoever he was, this person, he was mentally ill and mad. Lance's journal, Ostara, was sold in a tobacconist's shop at Felberstrasse 18 in Vienna, only a few doors down from Felberstrasse 22, where Hitler lived, from November 1908 to August 1909. Hitler was an avid reader of the magazine that we've just read about, so that sent him mad then. And even called on Lance to acquire back copies missing from his files. Lance wrote to a member of his order, "Hitler is one of our pupils." All bonkers. "We will yet be privileged to see that he, together with us, will win and will be able to establish a movement so powerful that it will shake the world." Terrorized, Lance later asserted that his order of the New Templars, which used the swastika as its emblem, had been first manifestation of the Nazi movement. It was during this period, when Hitler was under the influence of Lance's writings, that his virulent anti-Semitism first emerged, as Hitler relates in Mein Kampf. That's another horrible book, and I read it years ago when I was very young, and it was dreadful. This is new information for me that I've just read, and I can't still get my head round it, and I apologise for any laughter because it's not a funny matter, but I mean, it's sick head. I began to see Vienna in a different light. Wherever I went, I saw Jews, and the more I saw of them, the sharper I began to distinguish them from other people. Was there any form of filth or profligacy in which the Jew did not participate? The scales dropped from my eyes. I gradually began to hate them. This was the time in which the greatest change I was ever to experience took place in me. From a feeble cosmopolite, I had turned into a fanatical anti-Semite. I have to add here, I didn't know until recently, at the end of last year, from my aunt, that I am Jewish. I didn't know. My mother never told me she was Jewish. She never told me her mother was Jewish, and I never knew that she was. So, and I might even have Jewish on my father's side. But so I find all this hatred of Jews, even though I didn't know I am one or was one or I come from that line. I find this all offensive. Whether I would have found it without knowing I was Jewish, I'd find it offensive too. So extracts from Adolf Hitler is the point 46 further up there. New York, Mein Kampf. So, the Thule Society. The history of the Thule Society can be traced back to about 1910, when some virulently anti-Semitic members of the Volkskisch movement started the quasi-Masonic clandestine Germanenorden based on the Germanic pagan tradition. The founders were veterans of a host of anti-Semitic organizations, publications, and political parties, all linked to Guido List and his Ariosophy according to its own literature. The principal aims of the Germanenorden were the monitoring of Jews and their activities, the distribution of anti-Semitic material, and the mutual aid of the brothers in business matters. All members were to be flawless, Germanic descent, and preferably have blonde hair, light blue eyes, and pale skin. A recruitment guide referred to specific issues of Ostara that discussed racial characteristics. Armenenschaft, rules and rituals, were also explicitly referenced. The swastika figured prominently in their rituals and appeared on the seal of the order. After the First World War, the Germanenorden found itself in a state of disarray. It reformed with the purpose, in part, of assassinating public figures who were seen as enemies of the Volkisch German people. An early target was Matthias Erzberger, who had signed the armistice, as well as other Jewish and Republican enemies of the German nation. As a result of notoriety, As a result of notoriety from these political activities, the Germanenorden changed its name to the Thule Society. Thule was a mythological northern land from which the Aryans supposedly had come, apparently identified with Atlantis, which is dealing with that horrible woman. In 1918, the Bavarian branch of the Thule Society was taken over by a man born Adam Glauer, the son of a locomotive driver. Glauer had given himself the aristocratic name Baron Rudolf von Zeppendorf while spending 9 years in Turkey, where he had been forced to flee after running off with the married mother of the children he had been hired to tutor. In Turkey, he studied Sufi occultism, Islamic alchemy, Rosicrucianism, and Freemasonry. His interest in rune occultism, which he thought was related to Islamic mysticism led him to the society. So there's a point here. He claimed to have been adopted by the expatriate Baron Heinrich von Sebendorf while in Turkey. This is point 47, but my eyes haven't seen where that is. But so, when Jewish socialist Kurt Eisner was installed as Premier of Bavaria in 1918, following a bloodless coup, Sebendorf delivered an impassioned speech to the society that typified the Thule Society's blend of anti-Semitism, Germanic militarism, and paganism, a mixture that became the hallmark of the Third Reich. So that's why the Third Reich then was so evil. It was evil from the beginning. So yesterday we experienced the collapse of everything which was familiar, dear and valuable to us. In the place of our princes of Germanic blood rules our deadly enemy, Judah. A time will come of struggle, the most bitter need, a time of danger. I am determined to pledge the Thule to this struggle. Our order is a Germanic order. Loyalty is also Germanic. Our God is Walvator. His rune is the R rune, and the Trinity Wotan Willi We is the unity of the Trinity. The Ara rune signifies Aryan. We must fight until the swastika rises victoriously out of the icy darkness. And point 48, Goodrich Clark, Occult Roots of Nazism. And 49 is Rudolf Sebendorf, before Hitler came. So all these people are all one before Hitler. He just took over the mantle, it looks like. They created it and he took it over and made it worse. According to Sebendorf, the Thule Society played a central role in Hitler's rise to power. So I got that bit right. Thule members were the people to whom Hitler first turned and who first allied themselves with Hitler. The armament of the coming Führer consisted, besides the Thule Society itself, of the Deutsche Arbeiterverein, founded in the Thule by Brother Karl Harrer at Munich, and the Deutsche Sozialistische Partei, headed there by Hans-Georg Grasinger, whose organ was the Münchener Beobachter, later the Völkischer Beobachter. From these three sources, Hitler created the Nationalsozialistische Arbeiterpartei. The Münchener Beobachter had been an obscure Munich weekly until Thule Society members bought it and turned it into the official paper of the Nazi Party. So all them evil people were behind Hitler from the beginning, and all of them occultists and Satan worshippers and all. The Thule Society assembled weapons, trained soldiers, and helped organize the counter-revolution that overthrew the Bavarian socialist government in early 1919. So my dad was 3 and my mum was born in 1920. So it's not surprising that my grandma and my mother and everyone never said they were Jews. They knew what was coming. The Thule Society, aristocratic nature. It's weird that I'm doing this though, isn't it, as a Christian? The Thule Society's aristocratic nature proved an impediment. I'm not reading very well today, I'm sorry, but this is all doing my head in. An impediment to its expansion in order to increase its political influence. It seems that I'm okay reading Bibles and prayers and all sorts of Christian things. When it comes to something like this, I've lost the plot and I'm out of the... My mind is having trouble with this, I can tell you. In order to increase its political influence, it created a working class sister society called the DAP, or Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, German Workers' Party. In 1919, Hitler gained control of the DAP, German Workers' Party, and renamed it the National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei NSDAP, more commonly known in its abbreviated form, the Nazi Party. Well, that's easier to read. The Nazi flag, a black swastika in a white circle against a red background, was designed by the Thule Society member Dr. Friedrich Krohn, K-R-O-H-N. From the Thule Society came many of those who set the direction of the Third Reich, including Dietrich Eckart, Alfred Rosenberg, and Rudolf Hess. That name rings a bell. Dietrich Eckart. And at the bottom, footnote 50, Goodrich Clark, Occult Roots of Nazism, and D. Sklar, The Nazis and the Occult. Since no official membership lists of the Thule Society have been found, it's unclear whether these men were formal members or simply frequent guests. That's a good word, frequent guests. Dietrich Eckart was another leading member of the Thule Society. He was an occultist and publisher of a virulently anti-Semitic Volkskisch periodical named Auf gut Deutsch, in plain German. His articles flowed from the theories of Chamberlain, Lance and Liszt, which we've read about them earlier. He predicted the imminent coming of a German Messiah who would free Germany from the chains of Christianity and inaugurate a new era. Eckart was made editor-in-chief of the Volkskischer Beobachter, the official Nazi newspaper, and would become very influential in Nazi Germany. Eckart claimed to have initiated Hitler into occultism while visiting him in Lansdorf Fortress prison. In occult circles, initiation is the rite by which, from the point of view of the occultist, higher centers are opened, and he gains extrasensory powers. In reality, it entails the introduction of demonic entities into the individual, entities who then deeply influence him. Eckart wrote a friend shortly before his death in 1923, "Follow Hitler. He will dance, but it will be to my tune. I have initiated him into the secret doctrine, opened his centers of vision, and given him the means to communicate with the powers. Don't grieve for me, for I have influenced history more than any other German. How evil is that? This claim is given some credibility by the fact that Hitler referred to Eckhart on at least one occasion as his John the Baptizer. I know that Hitler hated Catholics. I know that. I've known that all my life. And that the very last words in Mein Kampf are Hitler's warm dedication of it to that man who, by words and by thoughts, and finally by deeds, dedicated his life to the awakening of our nation, Dietrich Eckart, as Hitler's social as well as occult mentor. Eckhart was also responsible for having introduced him to the moneyed and influential social circles of post-war Munich during the early days of his rise to power, and thus had been instrumental in launching Hitler's career of murdering was his career. So the footnotes before I go on: Joseph Carr, The Twisted Cross, 1985. Hitler Mein Kampf. This dedication is frequently edited out of abridged translation, so somewhere in this is going to be an abridged something from the Mein Kampf, but I can't read the small fonts. Eckhart claimed to have initiated Hitler into occultism. Anyway, Alfred Rosenberg, the son of a poor shoemaker. Rosenberg gained his standing in the Thule Society by introducing to it the scurrilous anti-Semitic fabrication known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which he had brought with him when he emigrated to Germany from Moscow. He eventually became the official ideologist of the Nazi Party and the primary theologian of its new religion. So they called themselves a religion as well as political. As well as editor of the Nazi Party paper. He claimed to have been the author of the original program for the Nazi Party. His official positions were summarized in the 1934-1935 Das Deutsche Führer Lexikon as follows. From 1921 until the present, editor of the Vollrecht Beobachter, editor of the NS Monatsheft 1930, Reichstag deputy and representative of the foreign policy of the movement since April 1933, leader of the foreign political office of the NSDAP, then designated as Reichsleiter, January 1934, deputized by the Führer for the spiritual and philosophical education of the NSDAP, the German Labour Front, and all related organizations. As the official spiritual leader of the Nazi movement, Rosenberg was explicit about the rejection of Christianity in favour of Nazism's own Germanic nationalist pagan religion. In his 1930 book, Myth of the 20th Century, he wrote, "We now realize that the central supreme values of the Roman and Protestant churches, being a negative Christianity, do not respond to our soul, that they hinder the organic powers of the peoples determined by their Nordic race, that they must give way to them, that they will have to be remodeled to conform to a Germanic Christendom. Therein lies the meaning of the present religious search. Today, a new faith is awakening. The myth of the blood, the belief that the divine being of mankind generally is to be defended with the blood. The faith embodied by the fullest realization that the Nordic blood constitutes that mystery which has supplanted and overwhelmed the old sacraments. Notice they mentioned sacraments. I'm amazed he did. So that meant he knew the religion. Chief of Counsel for Prosecution of Axis Criminality, Nazi Conspiracy and Aggression, a collection of documentary evidence prepared by the American and British prosecuting staffs for presentation before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, Washington, D.C., U.S., 1946. That's 76 years ago, my birth year. Racism was at the heart of his view of the New World Order. They're still looking for the New World Order now. They're still not let go, have they? The essence of the contemporary world revolution lies in the awakening of the racial types, not in Europe alone, but on the whole planet. This awakening is the organic counter-movement against the last chaotic remnants of liberal economic imperialism. Once the great world battle is concluded, after the defeat of the present epoch, there will be a time when the swastika will be woven into the different banners of the Germanic peoples as the Aryan symbol of rejuvenation. Also, with, of course, the need to get rid of the Jews for once and for all. Alfred Rosenberg, Myth of the 20th Century, 1982, cited in Nazi Conspiracy and Aggression. Rosenberg cited in Nazi, so that's coming in the footnote. For Germany, the Jewish question, we're talking about then, is only then solved when the last Jew has left the greater German space, since Germany, with its blood and its nationalism, has now broken for always this Jewish dictatorship for all Europe, and has seen to it that Europe as a whole will become free from the Jewish parasitism. Once more, we may, I believe, also say for all Europeans. For Europe, the Jewish question is only then solved when the last Jew has left the European continent. If the Jews were to stifle us, we would never be able to fulfill our mission, which is the salvation of the world, but would, to be frank, succumb to insanity. Considered in himself, the Jew represents nothing else but this blind will for destruction, the insanity of mankind, to strip the world of its soul. That and nothing else is what Judaism wants. This, however, would be tantamount to the world's destruction. Rosenberg drew up the program for the National Reich Church, which included: the National Church will clear away from its altars all crucifixes, Bibles and pictures of saints. On the altars there must be nothing but Mein Kampf, and to the left of the altar a sword. On the day of its foundation, The Christian cross must be removed from all churches, cathedrals and chapels, and must be superseded by the only unconquerable symbol, the swastika. A hymn written for the new faith included the stanza, "The time of the cross has gone now, the sun wheel shall arise." What evil people. Speech given March 28, 1941, on the occasion of the opening of the Institute for the Exploration of the Jewish Question, cited in Nazi Conspiracy and Aggression. Alfred Rosenberg's The Earth-Centered Jew Lacks a Soul, quoted in Sklar, Nazis and the Occult. William S. Shirer, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, 1992. And it continued over there after the sun will arise, where it said, "The time of the cross has gone now, the sun wheel shall arise, and so with God we shall be free at last and give our people their honour back." I mean, they were sickheads. The sun wheel is the swastika. Once again, the direct opposition of the Nazis to Christianity and to all things Christian is evident. Well, I agree with that comment. Goodness me, I've never read anything as I hate what I'm reading, by the way. Martin Bormann, Hitler's deputy Führer, worked closely with Rosenberg in his effort to establish the new Nazi religion. In various letters to him, Bormann mentioned the need for Rosenberg's department to abolish religious services in the schools, confiscate religious property, circulate anti-religious material to the soldiers, and close down Christian periodicals and theological faculties. For it was clear to him that the Christian churches stood in the way of Nazism and had to be conquered. And as he wrote to Rosenberg, the churches cannot be conquered by a compromise between National Socialism and Christian teachings, but only through a new ideology whose coming you yourself have announced in your writings. Himmler, Willigut, the SS, and the Ahnenerbe. No treatment of occultism in the Third Reich would be complete without discussing Himmler's occultism. His occult mentor, Karl Maria Willigut, The Occult Underpinnings of the SS, and the Special SS Branch formed to deal with occult matters, the Ahnenerbe. Himmler's SS was intrinsically a neo-religious order, incorporating the new mythology of the Third Reich. To qualify, candidates not only had to have proven pure Aryan blood, going back 3 generations, but had to fit the physical Aryan model in height, colouring, and overall looks. Representing the bloodline for reconstructing the Aryan race, they were to reproduce as freely as possible, not only with their own wives, but also with additional women. To provide these additional women, Himmler set up the Lebensborn program, in which young women who exhibited the desired Aryan racial characteristics were recruited for specially set up hostels established on confiscated Jewish properties, where they would breed with SS men. It was considered an honour to be selected. 60% of the applicants, so they had to apply. Are they mad? Whew. Were turned down, and official figures show that the programme resulted in about 6,000 illegitimate births. So what happened to the babies and the children? How did the mothers keep them if they weren't married? Huh? Initiation into the SS reflected its character as an occult brotherhood requiring memorization of a formal catechism, exercises in torturing animals, and a nighttime final initiation ceremony. You know, the more I'm reading this, the more I actually begin to feel sick. Excuse me a minute, I feel sick. I have to have a drink. Not because I'm thirsty, but I feel sick. I feel sick the more I read into this. This is really horrible. Mind you, what did I expect? I don't know what I expected, but it gets worse and worse. Exercises in torturing animals and a nighttime final initiation ceremony. The headquarters of the SS, Himmler's castle at Wewelsburg, housed the SS Officers' College and was explicitly set up along occult, neo-religious lines. The emblem of the SS, the two lightning bolts, was the occult double sigrun taken from Aristophany. Officer candidates at the college were given courses on runes and their occult significance. And it's got a footnote. Source: the memoirs of Himmler's personal masseur, Felix Kirsten, the Kirsten Memoirs, 1940 to 1945, published 1956, London, Hutchinson. Himmler believed in reincarnation and karma. His spiritual outlook was primarily based on Hinduism, as is much of the New Age, and he was never without his copy of the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scriptures. He believed he was the reincarnation of the 10th century German King Henry I, who spoke to him and told him what to do, a demon pretending to be that king. Oh dear. He had the king's bones exhumed and placed in the crypt of a cathedral, where each year on the anniversary of his death, Himmler would hold a midnight ritual. He practiced the now popular New Age technique, positive visualization. For example, visualize world peace. That's what he wasn't visualizing. In an attempt to force others' wills to his own. He had an institute in Berlin set up to study the potential of harnessing occult sources of power, including black magic, spiritualist mediums, pendulum practitioners, and astrologers for the war effort. In 1935, Himmler established the Ahnenerbe to conduct research into the mythological and occult background of the Third Reich. By the time it was fully developed in 1939, it comprised 50 branches. Its research projects conducted at a cost estimated to have exceeded the budget spent by the US in developing the atomic bomb, included the following. I'm going to name them. Expeditions to Tibet to analyze Tibetan skull structure to establish Aryan ancestry. Expeditions to South America to study Indian medicines. An expedition to find the legendary lost continent of Atlantis, the supposed original home of the Aryan race. Expeditions to southwest France to search for the Holy Grail in the vicinity of Cathar fortresses. Gathering information on the Rosicrucian movement. Researching the supposed occult significance of, among other topics, Gothic towers, the Etonian top hat, and the Irish harp. Studying the supposed special properties of Aryan horses and Aryan bees. It's even more ridiculous. After the war ended, an academic US journal reviewed the astronomical research that had been carried out in Germany during the war. After summarizing the many legitimate research projects, the article continued. I'm sorry if it makes me smile, but my head can't get round some of this stuff. It gets so ridiculous. I'll read the footnote before I read the article. Popular Astronomy, published by the Goodsell Observatory of Carleton College, Northfield, Maine. Dr. Fisher joined the US nuclear weapons program following the war. He complained that in the Third Reich, scientists had been continually pulled off promising weapons research for such insane projects. Well, that's why I was smiling, because they all sound insane. Gerard P. Cooper, Kuiper, German Astronomy During the War, Popular Astronomy, June 46. So I'm now going to read the paragraph. Maybe we're going to get some daft things in this. This report would be unbalanced. It's making me unbalanced without a reference to the darker side of the picture. One of the symptoms of intellectual deterioration in Nazi Germany was the widespread use of pseudo-scientific theories. Not only was astrology widely practiced, even in Hitler's headquarters, but the theory was popular that the world was a hollow shell, with the human race living on the inside. Howelt theory. Certain German naval circles believed in the Howelt theory. They considered it helpful to locate the British fleet because the curvature of the earth would not obstruct the observation. I'll have to cut in here because my sense of humour is sick as well. No wonder they lost the war, because they were idiots following all this stuff. I just can't, I can't, I mean, some of this stuff, of course they had to lose the war because they weren't Christians. Oh dear. This book has suddenly become mad. Totally mad. Well, all war is mad. Anyone who wants war is mad, and that includes Biden and the rest of them. So, they considered it helpful to locate the British fleet because the curvature of the earth would not obstruct observation. Accordingly, a party of about 10 men, under the scientific leadership of Dr. Heinz Fischer, was sent out from Berlin to the Isle of Rügen in the Arctic to photograph the British fleet with infrared equipment at an upward angle of some 45 degrees. Other groups, including officers of flag rank, practiced or supported Pendelforschung, a large map of the Atlantic, was spread out horizontally with a 1-inch toy battleship as test object. A pendulum was swung above the battleship. If the pendulum reacted, it proved the presence of a true battleship at that location. So, well, they totally were mad. I'll have to read that back. Other groups, including officers of flag rank, practiced or supported Pendelforschung, a large map of the Atlantic was spread out horizontally with a 1-inch toy battleship as test object. A pendulum was swung above the battleship. If the pendulum reacted, it proved the presence of a true battleship at that location. They deserved to lose the war. Oh, Lord, have mercy. Oh, I wish I had a forewarning about what this contents were before I read it. So, Popular Astronomy, published by Goodsell Observatory of Carlton College, Northfield. I read that before I read this. I better turn over and hope it comes back to something more normal. Oh dear. Oh dear, dear, dear. Oh, what am I reading? I have to ask myself that. What am I reading? As mentioned earlier, Himmler's mentor, you have to forgive me because I've got a weird sense of humour and I don't often get humoured like I am in this book because it's not really funny. But that's my weird humour. As mentioned earlier, Himmler's mentor in his occultism was Carl Maria Willigut. Willigut's own occult gifts supposedly included ancestral memory, enabling him to remember both his own experiences of past lives and also the experience of others in his ancestral past, thereby enabling him to have first-hand knowledge of the culture and esoteric lore of the Third Reich's glorious pagan Teutonic past, extending over thousands of years. They're totally mad. This made him invaluable to Himmler for research on ancient, actually mythical, Germanic traditions and history, a role he filled as a member of the SS staff from 1933 to 1939. I think I should advertise this part all as humour, funny. I mean, it's just comical. I mean, but they were serious about what they were doing. Being promoted during that period from SS Hauptsturmführer captain to SS brigadier on the personal recommendation of Himmler. Or if this doesn't prove they were all mad, nothing will. It was Willigut who designed the infamous SS Death's Head ring. Willigut had a long history in Volkisch and Ariosophical research, having had a book on Teutonic rune mythology published in 1903 by the same publisher who handles some of Liszt's works. He had been active in occult circles including Lance's Order of the New Templars and a quasi-Masonic lodge called the Scalaraphia since the turn of the century. Willigut taught that the Bible had been originally written in German. What about the Hebrew and Greek? And that Christ was in reality the ancient Germanic god Christ with a K, R-I-S-D, and only later adopted and distorted into the saviour known to Christianity. His version of German history went back to 228000 BC, 228,000 BC, and was based on his own supposed ancestral memory. This memory showed he, I should put in brackets, balmy. This memory showed him 3 suns in the sky and an earth populated by giants, dwarfs and other fantastical creatures. Well, they were giants, so we don't argue about that. He saw that he himself came from a family prominent in Germanic political, cultural and spiritual affairs as early as 78,000 BC, but whose glorious heritage was later sabotaged, wait for this, by Jews and Freemasons conspiring against the ancient Germanic religion. He was totally off his head. That isn't in the book. His involuntary commitment His involuntary commitment in the Salzburg insane asylum from 1924 to 1927 apparently did not disqualify him from his later role as the spiritual leader of Himmler and the SS. I began to think earlier that he was mad. Well, now that confirms if he was in an asylum, he must have been more than mad. It did, however, force him to change his name from Willigut to Wiesthor when he joined the SS. Didn't stop his madness. It was on the advice of Willigut that in November 1933, Himmler took over the 17th century castle of Wewelsburg to be the officers' training college and order castle of the SS. Willigut had convinced him that the castle would play an important role in the ultimate East-West confrontation to come. Wewelsburg Castle was described in Time Life's book, The SS. In 1934, Himmler selected a mouldering cliff-top castle in Westphalia to serve as the SS High Temple, known as Wewelsburg. The 17th century fortress was overhauled at a cost of more than $3 million. That's a lot of money then. A sizable sum, considering that labour was extracted free from the concentration camp inmates. The sanctum included a 12,000-volume library of Aryan law and a cavernous dining hall with an Arthurian round table for Himmler and 12 trusted lieutenants. Reportedly, each knight of Himmler's round table received a coat of arms. At the man's death, his emblem was to be incinerated in the pit of the Supreme Leader's Hall, and the ashes placed in an urn atop one of the 12 pedestals there. At Wewelsburg, Willigut sought to re-establish what he claimed had been the ancient Germanic religion. introducing a host of religious rituals, including pagan wedding ceremonies for SS men and their brides, pagan baby naming ceremonies to replace baptism, and so forth. A 1936 memorandum from Himmler dictated that the new religious festivals to be observed included Hitler's birthday, April 20, May Day, summer solstice, harvest feast, the Beer Hall Putsch anniversary, November the 9th, and winter solstice. Once again, the Nazis' utter disdain for and desire to replace Christianity is more than apparent. So the next title is Hitler and the New Nazi Religion. I'm just seeing how many, still got quite a long way to go. Yeah, we're not finished yet. So the new title, Hitler, and I do apologise for laughing, but this got so ridiculous. Hitler and the New Nazi Religion. We have seen that Nazi ideology consisted of an interweaving of Germanic ultra-nationalism and a neo-Germanic paganism, from its earliest manifestations in the Volkisch clubs and Wandervogel groups, through its intellectual developments in proto-Nazi eugenics and race theory, to the movements aimed at political activity, culminating in the Nazi Party itself. Throughout, it was imbued with a fanatical sense of national racial superiority and permeated with a revival of a romanticized Teutonic paganism, replete with the revival of ancient gods, rites, rituals, and symbols, including the swastika, and imbued with an active occultism coming from Eastern religions via theosophy. The same is true of the culture adopted by the Nazis, as shown by its favourite cultural expression, the operas of Wagner. You don't sound it as a W, but a var. His famous Ring trilogy, for instance, is, at least on the surface, an exaltation of Teutonic paganism. Another of his operas, Parsifal, although more ambiguous, served the Nazis' purposes equally well. Some see its mixture of magic, occultism, and Christian symbolism to be thinly veiled paganism. Others see it as Christianity expressed in allegory. Whichever Wagner's intent might have been, and his personal comments on the matter are highly contradictory. This very ambiguity perfectly suited the Nazis' plan. For faced with the task of converting a population who thought of themselves as Christian to Nazi neo-paganism, one of their prime techniques was to co-opt Christian concepts and incorporate them into their new diabolical religion. The most blatant example of the Nazis' perverse co-option of Christianity is the assigning of the role of Messiah to Hitler. In this blasphemy, Hitler takes the place of Christ. The 1,000-year reign of the Third Reich is the messianic era on earth. The Aryan race takes the place of the Jews as the chosen people, and blood purity takes the place of holiness as the essence of salvation.
Hitler alluded to this messianic role when he said, "Humanity accomplishes a step up every 700 years, and the ultimate aim is the coming of the sons, plural, of God. All created forces will be concentrated in a new species. It will be infinitely superior to modern man." And again when he said, "Those who see in National Socialism nothing more than a political movement know scarcely anything of it. It is more even than a religion. It is the will to create mankind anew." He explicitly asserted the underlying paganism when he said, "The old beliefs will be brought back to honor again. The whole secret knowledge of nature of the divine, the demonic, we will wash off the Christian veneer and bring out a religion peculiar to our race." At the bottom it's a footnote, Nazis, the Occult Conspiracy video number 621631, produced by the Discovery Channel. This perversion of Christianity with Hitler as the Messiah is also described in Himmler's own words, recounted by his masseur in Felix Kirsten, the Kirsten Memoirs, 1940 to 1945. Hitler gave Himmler the task of preparing the doctrines for this great Germanic religion to be imposed on all Europe. So I haven't finished reading, but I'm ready to turn over when I finish this page. He said, "The promised 1,000-year reign of the Reich was an overt allusion to Christ's 1,000-year reign, part of the second coming, which we're still waiting for, prophesied in the book of Revelation." So they were really out of touch, because only God the Father knows when the second coming will be. And they've given some part of Revelation here. "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it, and sealed it over him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were ended. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who shares in the first resurrection. They shall be priests of God and of Christ, and they shall reign with him 1,000 years." Revelation 20, 1-6. Already in 1931, a Protestant pastor in Germany identified the extreme nationalistic movement of the Nazis as a perverted reflection of messianic prophecy in a lecture entitled "Political Messianship." Even Protestant pastors confuse the secularized eschatology of the Volksche movement with the legitimate eschatology of the Church's proclamation, and enthusiastically fall in with the National Socialist camp. The cause of Satan's fall was his desire to take the place of God, whose role he apes among his followers in parallel fashion. His earthly representative aped the role of Messiah and claimed his own advent as the second coming. The 1935 German Farmer's Almanac provides an example of this replacement of Christianity. In it, every single Christian feast day was replaced with a pagan celebration, earning the following protests from the Catholic Bishop of Trier. And quote, "I am surprised and deeply shocked that the Reich Agricultural Corporation, to which every German farmer, man and woman, must belong, should have offered this almanac. It is a deep insult to every Christian and Catholic feeling. The saints' days, the mention of every Christian feast day, even Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost, have disappeared. January 6th, the Three Kings, is the Three Aesir Day. February 22nd, the Feast of St. Peter's Chair, is the Feast of Thor's Chair. Ash Wednesday is Ash Woden's Day. On Maundy Thursday, the Feast of the Institution of the Blessed Sacrament, there takes place the consecration of the night light oil. Easter, the resurrection of our Lord, is the feast of Ostara, a German spring goddess. Ascension Day is rescue of Thor's hammer. Christmas Eve is the birthday of Baldur, god of light, and the visit of the infant Yule." A few years later, it was another bishop of Trier, Monsignor Bornwasser, who complained of the Nazis' intent to eliminate the celebration of Christmas. In his New Year's Eve sermon at the close of 1937, he said, and at the bottom, Bishop Franz Rudolph, in the official gazette of the Diocese of Trier, February the 1st, 1935, cited in the persecution of the Catholic Church in the Third Reich Anonymous, was originally published 1941, published by Fort Collins. Anyway, there's not much more there to read. So, I'm going to continue. So, a few years later, it was another bishop of Trier, Monsignor Bornwasser, who complained of the Nazis' intent to eliminate the celebration of Christmas. In his New Year's Eve sermon at the close of 1937, he said the following: "You have heard of the so-called winter solstice celebration. A few years ago I said, I am not sure whether there lies therein a hidden danger for our youth. Today I am sure. This artificially stirred up old Germanic pagan consecration of fire is meant as a direct challenge to the highest mystery of our religion, the incarnation of Jesus Christ on the holy night of Bethlehem. I leave it to you to judge for yourselves. What I'm going to read is taken from the periodical Führerdienst, the Leader's Task of the Jung Volt, junior section of the Hitler Youth, 12th of November, December 1937, page 6. Because they brainwashed all the youth. They had a youth Hitler. At another meeting, the winter solstice will be celebrated, we have to train our young members in order to enable them to celebrate this Christmas stripped of all the parasitical excrescences which were implanted in the hearts and minds of the German people by the Christian denominations. What is the meaning of this blasphemous remark? Our young children are told that they have to get rid of all parasitical excrescences implanted in the hearts and minds of the German people by the Christian denominations? What are these? The mystery of the incarnation of Jesus Christ on the Holy Night? From the hearts of the young? The memory that Christmas is the day of the birth of our Saviour is to be eradicated? And an old Germanic pagan consecration of fire is to take place? Christian fathers and mothers, now you know the real meaning of the celebration of the winter solstice. Up to now, it had been concealed behind a mask, but today, this mask has been dropped. We now know that all this talk about the German winter solstice is in reality directed against the most sublime mystery of Christmas, the incarnation of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is particularly interesting since now in the US there is an attempt to replace Christmas with winter solstice or festival of light. Celebrations in many schools and other public settings. One must wonder whether it's not the same spirit at work among us today. Well, it sure is. The next thing we'll be hearing, it's happening here in Great Britain. It is also interesting that it was the Farmer's Almanac. Note the word farmers. That was the vehicle for this attempt to eradicate Christianity. It calls to mind today's New Age movement, in which the paganization of agriculture is also a current theme. Those interested in new farming techniques, motivated by a reverence for the earth, that can border on or cross over into actual worship, are also in the forefront of the movement to replace Christianity with a pagan earth mother religion. Again, we must ask if it is the same underlying spirit at work in both cases. It most certainly is. The fact that the Reich Agricultural Organization was in the foreground of the attempt to eliminate Christianity was evident. One of its leaders succinctly stated, "Hitler is our saviour. It is to him that we must pray." Well, they must have been mad, because he was mad. In saying this, he was merely putting in a nutshell the heart of the Nazi religion. It was a theme constantly repeated by devoted followers of Hitler. When a Nazi journal asked readers what the Führer meant to them, typical responses included, and I'm going to quote now, "The Führer is the visible personal expression of what in our youth was represented as God. I've never felt the divine power as near as in the greatness of our Führer. What the Führer has given me is not only a political ideology, but also a religion." That's what they quoted here. How shall I put it in words what I feel for my Führer? I look up to him now as I prayed to God in my childhood. The Führer is the bread of which the soul stands in need. I would like to say openly what the high teaching of the Führer is to me, a religion, the German religion. Adolf Hitler means the same as the word God means to a fanatical and orthodox Christian. The Führer's portrait hangs in my office as well as in my drawing room at home. Every glance at it releases in me the feelings that devout people allege they experience in earnest prayer. The Nazis made no secret of what the future held for Christianity should they have their way. At a meeting of the German faith movement in Hanover in 1937, the provincial leader, when asked, "What is to become of the numerous churches when the present generation which still clings to Christianity has died out?" replied, "Churches of artistic and historic value will of course be preserved. They will be used for the solemn festivals of the German people, but naturally only after removing all Christian symbols. Second and third-rate churches, however, will be demolished." As the devil apes God, always providing a distorted, grotesque caricature of God and true religion, so too did the Nazi religion ape the Christianity it sought to supplant. For instance, it took various Christian symbols and rites and imbued them with its own perverse, usually occult significance. Thus, upon the Nazis' triumphant entry into Vienna, Hitler immediately took possession of the Holy Lance, the spearhead thought to have pierced the side of Christ, in the belief that the possession of this Christian relic would magically guarantee success to his schemes of world conquest. The Christian use of sacred relics was aped with the blood flag, which was a Nazi flag used in the failed beer hall Putsch of 1923 and stained with the blood of Nazi stormtroopers killed in the unsuccessful coup. It was considered to be sacred and to be imbued with magical power that was transmitted to a new Nazi flags when Hitler touched them to the blood flag, in a rite which only he could perform. And in a striking way, the extreme nationalism of the Nazi religion aped the role of the Jewish people in Christianity. The Jews had two key roles to play: to prepare for the incarnation, one related to the line of the descent that would culminate in the Blessed Virgin Mary, and the other related to the land. In the Old Testament, there is a deep mystery to the line of descent or bloodlines. One need only think of how the Jews were blessed in perpetuity for having descended from Abraham, of how the priests in Judaism had to be descended from Aaron, and how the Messiah was to come from the line of David. This sense of Mary as the culmination of the most perfect line of descent was beautifully expressed by the Venerable Anne Catherine Emmerich, a Catholic nun, stigmatist and visionary of the late 18th century. The Blessed Virgin Mary was the one and only pure blossom of the human race, flowering in the fullness of time. All the children of God, from the beginning of time, who have striven after salvation, contributed to her coming. She alone was the pure, immaculate flesh and blood of the whole human race, prepared and purified and ordained and consecrated through all the generations of her ancestors, guided, guarded, and fortified by the law until she came forth as the fullness of grace. The other role the Jews were to play involved conquering and defending the Holy Land, the sacred land promised to them by God, which was to become the home on earth of God as man. Both of these roles were aped in the Nazis' religion of Blut and Boden, blood and soil, in which they dedicated themselves to preserving or restoring the purity of the Germanic bloodlines and protecting the sacred German soil. And, as Judaism was to be followed by Christianity, which would universalize the salvation offered to the Jews by extending the covenant to all mankind through faith rather than through blood, so too was the Volkisch movement to be followed by the Third Reich, which would universalize the Aryan salvation by exterminating or enslaving all non-Aryans. There are many indications that Hitler's relationship to the satanic was intentional, explicit, and extensive, no less an authority than the current chief exorcist of Rome, Father Gabriel Amorth, stated that certainly Hitler was consecrated to Satan. A book that extensively details Hitler's explicit involvement in Satanism, written by a respected academic historian, was praised by Reverend Lawrence Giese of the Vatican Commission on Cults as a masterpiece of historical research. A final macabre confirmation was given by Hitler's choice of one of the most significant dates of the year in Satanism to commit suicide. April the 30th. Goodness me, that's my friend Barbara's birthday. Ah, bless her. The pagan feast of Walpurgis Night. Sexual Degeneracy is the next title. We're still in this same chapter. Another aspect that highlights the contrast between the Nazi pagan religion and Christianity is its attitude toward human sexuality. Pagan religions, including those mentioned in the Bible, as well as Greek and Roman paganism, as well as the neo-paganism of the New Age, all extol the pursuit of sexual pleasure, especially in its more debased and degrading forms. At the same time, the separation of sexual pleasure from its natural and divinely ordained function has always been strongly condemned by Judaism and Christianity. No concept is more characteristically Christian than that of sexual purity. This is particularly visible in the Catholic Church, or it should be. If it isn't anymore, it's in disarray, and everything is not the same everywhere anymore, but we have to keep up the traditions and the teachings of the Church because they're still relevant and they're still active. They haven't been changed. They can't be changed. They will not be changed. The traditions of the Catholic teaching remain the same till Jesus returns. This is particularly visible in the Catholic Church, which teaches that the absolute epitome of human race, the most perfect human creature who ever was or ever will be, is the Blessed Virgin Mary. The Church has traditionally considered celibacy to be an intrinsically superior state, although not intended for everyone, and requires it of those especially consecrated to God in religious life or the priesthood. Even in the case of married life, in which celibacy is not appropriate, chastity is still required, as reflected, for example, in the solemn statement of Pope Pius XI in his 1930 encyclical Casti Connubii, which means chaste marriage. Any use whatsoever of matrimony exercised in such a way that the act is deliberately frustrated in its natural power to generate life is an offence against the law of God and of nature, and those who indulge in such are branded with the guilt of a grave sin. So, it is not surprising that where one finds the antithesis of Christianity, one finds the pursuit of sexual pleasure for its own sake in increasingly depraved forms. That was certainly the case in all of the streams, intellectual, social, and spiritual, that led up to the Third Reich. Given the distastefulness of the subject, only the briefest outline will be given here. We have seen how the intellectual underpinnings of the Third Reich were intimately linked to the eugenics and birth control movement, which existed to separate sexual pleasure from procreation. The movement's champion, Margaret Sanger, that wicked evil woman, was an outspoken proponent of promiscuity, amongst being a pagan and an atheist and other things. The joys of the flesh and open marriage. Central to the Volkisch revival were the Wandervogel hiking and camping clubs for boys that later evolved into the Hitler Youth. Not only was homosexuality rampant in these groups, but the movement itself was also an effort to revive the Greek ideal of pedagogic pederasty. It was pederast at its roots. The founders and leaders of the movement, Karl Fischer, Hans Bleuer, Wilhelm Jansen, etc., were open both about their own homosexuality and about its appropriateness among the members. Already in 1912, Hans Bleuer, who was also the theoretician of the organization of homosexuals known as the Gemeinschaft der Eigenen, Community of the Elite, wrote a book extolling the role of pederasty in the movement, the German Wanderwelt movement, as an erotic phenomenon. This open embrace of homosexuality continued in the Hitler Youth to such an extent that a prominent German newspaper, the Rheinische Zeitung, warned parents to protect your sons from physical preparation, initiation into homosexuality in the organization. The leader of the Hitler Youth organization, Baldur von Schirach, was arrested by the police for perverse sexual practices and liberated on the intervention of Hitler, who soon afterward made him leader of the Hitler Youth. There's another footnote that I need to read because it was on the page before and it's quite long and this font is very tiny for my eyes. And it's from that page, but there's a lot here to do with the Catholics here. For instance, St. Ignatian of Loyola's rules for thinking with the Church. We must praise highly virginity and continency, and matrimony ought not to be praised as much as any of these, cited in John Harden, S.J.A. Treasury of Catholic Wisdom, San Francisco Ignatius Press, 1995. The paragraph in its entirety is even more emphatic, since therefore openly departing from the uninterrupted Christian tradition, some recently have judged it possible solemnly to declare another doctrine regarding this question. The Catholic Church, to whom God has entrusted the defence of integrity and purity of morals, standing erect in the midst of the moral ruin which surrounds her, in order that she may preserve the chastity of the nuptial union from being defiled by this foul stain, raises her voice in token of her divine ambassadorship, and through our mouth proclaim anew any use whatsoever of matrimony exercised in such a way that the act is deliberately frustrated in its natural power to generate life, is an offence against the law of God and of nature, and those who indulge in such are branded with the guilt of grave sin. So you have to go to confession. So, right, I have a bit of a cold. I have to do, sorry, I'm sniffing. Can't help these things, just won't go away. I will continue from the top of page 236. In 1934, the Gestapo reported over 40 cases of pederasty in a single troop of the Hitler Youth. These pederastic relationships between the boys and the group leaders became in fact the prototype for the Führer principle. As one former Wandervogel member wrote, "We little suspected then what power we had in our hands. We played with the fire that had set a world in flames, and it made our hearts hot. It was in our ranks that the word Führer originated, with its meaning of blind obedience and devotion. The Nazis' Sieg Heil salute originated in the Wandervogel groups. The stormtroopers fared no better. They were the successors of the Rosebashbund created by the homosexual Gerhard Rosbach as a predominantly homosexual union of the Freikorps, the independent inactive military reserve units that roamed Germany following its defeat in the First World War. Ernst Röhm, the later leader of 2,500,000 stormtroopers, was a notorious and open homosexual whose brash homosexual displays in public resulted in open scandals requiring public defences by Hitler. Weimar Defence Force official Helmut Klotz described Röhm as one of the most notorious pederasts walking about on this earth. A contemporary historian, very sympathetic to homosexuals, writes, Röhm's gay fun and games were certainly no secret. His amorous forays into gay bars and gay Turkish baths were riotous. Whatever anti-homosexual sentiments may have been expressed by straight Nazis were more than offset by the reality of highly visible, spectacular gay-loving Rome. The openly homosexual German magazine Der Eingene wrote in 1930, "Men such as Captain Röhm are to our knowledge no rarity at all in the National Socialist Party. It rather teems there with homosexuals of all kinds. The joy of man in man is the highest virtue of the Teutons." I'm beginning to feel sick. "It blossoms around their campfires and is cultivated and fostered by them in a way done in no other male union that is reared on party politics." Pulitzer Prize-winning American reporter H.R. Knickerbocker, who lived in Berlin for such much of the 20s and 30s, wrote that Rohem's chiefs were almost without exception homosexuals. Indeed, unless a stormtroop officer were homosexual, he had no chance of advancement. The former Chancellor General Kurt von Schleicher, himself the originator of the Freikorps, referred to Rohem's stormtroopers and the early Nazis as filthy boy streetwalkers. Hitler, too, was without doubt a sexual pervert. His homosexuality has been hotly debated for the past 50 years, but the evidence in favour is compelling. Samuel Egra, a Jewish historian who escaped from Germany in 1939, cites police reports that show that Hitler worked as a homosexual prostitute in Vienna from 1907 to 1912 and in Munich from 1912 to 1914. These police documents are also mentioned in an OSS report on Hitler prepared during the war, and copies of them reportedly ended up in the possession of Benito Mussolini, who referred to Hitler as that horrible sexual degenerate. The same OSS report also claimed that German military records show that Hitler was court-martialed for pederastic practices. The OSS also had interviews with two young men who claimed that they had been Hitler's homosexual partners. There is evidence of other sexual perversions as well. Hitler's coprophilia, gaining sexual satisfaction by being defecated or urinated on, and masochism are detailed in the same OSS report. And of the 4 women with whom Hitler is known to have had affairs, one was his own teenaged niece, and another was the 13-year-old daughter of a friend. All 4 later attempted suicide. So he was a pedophile as well. 2 succeeded. What an evil man. How did he achieve all that power? What was wrong with the world at that time? The concentration camps themselves were not free from the scourge of deviant sexuality, as evidenced in a number of survivors' accounts. Eli Wiesel in Night writes, "The head of our tent was a German. He was so fat he could hardly move. Like the leader of the camp, he loved children. There was a considerable traffic in children among homosexuals here, I later learned." According to survivors of the Treblinka concentration camp, one particularly brutal guard, Max Bielas, had a harem of little Jewish boys. He liked them young, no older than 17. Bielas sought in Treblinka only the satisfaction of his homosexual instincts. The occult groups that led up to Nazism suffered from the same vices. Whether Madame Blavatsky was actively a lesbian is a matter of some dispute. There is some cause for suspicion, including the endearments she used with her successor. Annie Besant, addressing her in one letter as "My darling Penelope," and signing it "Your female Ulysses." In any case, her second in command for the Theosophical Society in England, Charles Leadbeater, was in continual legal trouble for his pederasty. Lance, the publisher of Ostara, was expelled from his monastery, we read that earlier, for carnal desires. Some believe that to be a reference to homosexuality. A profound misogyny was reflected in his writings. The soul of the woman has something pre-human, something demonic about it. He also asserted that 75% of all married girls were fornicators and 95% of all married women were adulterers. What a dreadful person. The role that sexual perversion and debauchery played in Nazism and the movements leading up to it provides yet more evidence of the deeply anti-Christian impulse behind it. Excuse me a moment. I have to put the book down for a minute. My nose is giving me trouble. I apologise. And I must have another sip of drink. Let me continue. And the new title for this is still in the same chapter. I've stopped reading the footnotes. It's taking too much time because there's too much there now. The reaction of the rest of the world. While the active campaign to exterminate the Jews came from Germany and the Nazis, the rest of the civilized world did less than one might expect to try to save the victims. Out of the country that represented the apex of Western culture, from which the best of the world's great music, philosophy and science had come, arose a concerned effort to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth, and from the rest of the civilized world came a deafening silence. The lack of response by the rest of the West is typified by the 1938 Evian Conference. 10 days after Germany's invasion of Austria, Roosevelt called an international conference in Evian, France, to try to find countries that might be willing to accept Jewish refugees from the Nazis. Since the ascension of Hitler to power in 1933, the campaigns and intentions of the Third Reich toward the Jews were well known throughout the West. For instance, already on April 22nd, 1933, a New York Times correspondent wrote a first-hand description of Dachau. On September the 6th, 1933, the New York Times wrote, "Aryanism is now the keystone of Nazi policy, and of all the Nazi tendencies in the most warmly defended by the Germans, its corollary is persecution, even to extermination. The word is the Nazis' own, of the non-Aryans. If that can be established without too much world disturbance." An eyewitness account from a boy, non-Jewish, released from the Oranienburg concentration camp, was published on October the 6th, 1933, in the New York Times. During 1933, other witnesses of the horrors of the concentration camps reported their experience in the United States and British press, as well as in the British House of Commons. When the New York Times covered the 1936 Nazi Party Congress, it reported that one of the speakers stressed that extermination was, in the last analysis, the only real solution to the Jewish problem. If the final solution were to be reached, one must go the bloody path. To secure the safety of the whole world, they, the Jews, must be exterminated. What the Nazi invasion of Vienna in 1938 meant for Austria's Jews was well documented in the New York Times of March 20th, 1938. The death carts of the Anatomical Institution are busy daily collecting the bodies of those Jews poisoned by their own hands. Death seems to them the kindest gift. Truckloads of pale-faced citizens are being hurried through the streets to vanish through the great gates of the central prison. For many of them, the first stage of the journey to the concentration camp. During this period, the Third Reich was keeping a close eye on the reaction of the rest of the world to their campaign against the Jews, to see how far they could go without provoking a response. The United States did not even boycott the Berlin Olympic Games of 1936, despite the fact that by that time the anti-Semitic Nuremberg laws had been passed, and Jews in Germany were barred from any employment in government, the arts, the professions, or even manual crafts, and deprived of their citizenship. They were even banned from the very town where the 1936 Winter Olympics were being held, Garmisch-Partenkirchen, as well as many others. The lack of response from the rest of the world did not escape the Nazis. A month after assuming office, Hitler was referring sarcastically to the United States' refusal to allow Jewish refugees into the United States when he said, "Through its immigration law, America has inhibited the unwelcome influx of such races as it has been unable to tolerate in its midst. Nor is America now ready to open its doors to Jews fleeing from Germany." Just 5 days after Kristallnacht, when every synagogue in Germany was burned, every Jewish establishment vandalized and looted, 25,000 Jews taken to concentration camps, and the Jewish community fined 1 billion marks for the damage. Roosevelt was asked at a White House press conference, "Would you recommend a relaxation of our immigration restrictions so that the Jewish refugees could be received in this country?" His reply: "That is not in contemplation. We have the quota system." Hitler explicitly offered to send Germany's unwanted Jews to any country that was willing to receive them, knowing, however, that none was. I can only hope and expect that the other world, which has such deep sympathy for these criminals, will at least be generous enough to convert this sympathy into practical aid. We, on our part, are ready to put all these criminals at the disposal of these countries, for all I care, even on luxury ships. Ironically, this prophecy was tragically fulfilled when on May the 13th, 1939, Jewish refugees numbering 734 had been approved as immigrants to the United States, left Bremen on the German luxury ship St. Louis. Since their quota numbers would only come up in several months, they were headed for Cuba to wait until their numbers came up. However, the temporary landing certificates for Cuba that they had obtained prior to departure were rescinded before they arrived, and they were refused permission to land. They appealed to the United States to be allowed to arrive early in anticipation of the already approved visas, but the United States government staunchly refused. The refugees were forced to return to Europe, where most died in concentration camps. America's cruel. The fate of St. Louis, was the natural outcome of the Evian Conference. On the eve of the conference, Roosevelt, he's got blood on his hands. Roosevelt reassured the American people that the United States would not increase or revise its immigration quotas. The Vulture Beerbacher newspaper had jibed, "We cannot take seriously President Roosevelt's appeal to the nations of the world as long as the United States maintains racial quotas for immigrants." Apparently, none of the participants at the conference took the appeal seriously either. Australia, hardly suffering from excess population, responded, "As we have no real racial problem, we're not desirous of importing one." But look how they treated their Aboriginal people. The Peruvian delegation sarcastically responded that the United States has given Peru an example to follow in the caution and wisdom followed in its own immigration policies. Argentina pointed out that it had already accepted about as many of the refugees as the United States, that is, a few thousand, and so could not be expected to take any more. and so on for the 32 of the 34 participants. The only exceptions were tiny Denmark and Holland. The United States ended up not even filling its minuscule quota of a few thousand European Jews a year. Prospective immigrants were blocked with such impossible requirements for a Jew fleeing Nazi Germany as having to obtain a police certificate testifying to good character for the previous 5 years and 2 certified copies of all personal public records kept by the authorities. British-controlled Palestine was also unwilling to provide them a refuge. Even when fleeing, Jews managed to reach it. The British authorities refused them entry, in one notorious case, forcing a sinking ship crowded with refugees back to sea, resulting in the drowning death of 697 out of the 699 Jews on board within sight of the shore. One of the most poignant aspects of reading the testimonies of survivors of the concentration camps or of the ghetto extermination is their pathetic hope and certainty that if only the Allies were informed of what was being done to Jews, they would immediately respond with bombers overhead. Heroic efforts, often at the cost of lives, were made by resistance-fighting Jews to get the word to Allied authorities. The truth never occurred to them that the authorities had been getting reliable reports for months and years, often first-hand from Jews who had made the miraculous escapes and had decided to do nothing in response. Diabolical motivations behind the Holocaust. One cannot read very much about the Holocaust without being struck over and over again by the indications of diabolical inspiration for what happened. It appears in the extraordinary cruelty of the Nazis, in the philosophy of their leaders, in their explicit hatred of God and of religion, in their determination to wipe out Christianity as well as Judaism, in their open embrace of paganism and occultism, in their sexual perversity, and in their satanic cultic practices. It is in no way diminishes the responsibility or guilt of the perpetrators to suggest that they were directly inspired and at times possessed by demonic forces. This raises the question of why the attack on the Jews of the Holocaust was so important to the adversary of man's salvation. One hypothesis is that it might in part have been an attempt to forestall the second coming. Obviously, the first coming of the Messiah came through the Jews, and the New Testament also implies, most notably in Romans 11, that the Jews will have a role to play in the second coming. If so, then the eradication of the race might have been an attempt to prevent the second coming. It may seem paradoxical that the adversary should try to prevent the second coming, since it's going to happen as a certain fact. Why should the adversary hope or try to prevent it? The full answer lies within the mystery of iniquity, but that is the case we know from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Though already present in his church, Christ's reign is nevertheless yet to be fulfilled with power and great glory by the King's return to earth. Luke 21:27, Matthew 25:31. This reign is still under attack by the evil powers, even though they have been defeated definitively by Christ's Passover. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 7. If the adversary's primary motivation behind the Holocaust was to prevent the second coming of Christ by exterminating all of the Jews, there was still a secondary way he could succeed, even if some Jews survived. They would be by stopping the conversion of the Jews that must precede Christ's return. As the Catechism states, the glorious Messiah coming is suspended at every moment of history until his recognition by all Israel. Romans 11:20-26, Matthew 23:39. And the Holocaust has certainly had a tremendous deterring effect on conversion of Jews to Christianity. On the part of Jews, there is a natural tendency to think of the Nazis as Christians when they're Satanists, which increases the sense that many Jews have that Christianity is the enemy and results in an almost insurmountable emotional barrier against conversion. A Jew who does convert is often thought as having gone over to the side of the enemy, even at times to the Nazis. On the side of Christianity, a sense of collective guilt for the crimes of the Holocaust have caused many Christian denominations and even the Catholic Church to curtail or eliminate entirely any efforts to evangelize Jews. Any Christian missionary efforts that remain are often met with the challenge, how can you after the Holocaust? Individual Jews who convert, as well as Christian evangelization efforts towards Jews, whether coming from Jewish converts or Gentile Christians, are sometimes accused of trying to finish Hitler's work, or even of being worse than Hitler, because Hitler at least was overt in his attempt to destroy the Jews, whereas they are doing it covertly. If the adversary's fallback plan was to rely on the Holocaust to impede the ability of Jews to recognize the claims of Christianity, in that he has, at least in part, succeeded, the adversary may have also had a more immediate motivation, sheer, raw hatred of the Jews as God's chosen people. His fundamental hatred is against God. His attacks against man are an indirect way of getting at God, since God loves man so deeply. Given God's special love for the Jews, it is logical that the adversary would have a special hatred and vindictiveness towards them, a special eagerness to hurt them. God's particular love for the Jews is well documented in the Old Testament, where they are described as the chosen people, the apple of God's eye. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his own possession, out of all the peoples that are on the face of the earth. Deuteronomy 7:6. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. He found him in a desert land, and in the howling waste of the wilderness. He encircled him. He cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Deuteronomy 32:9-10. For thus said the Lord of hosts, he who touches you touches the apple of my eye. Zechariah 2:8. The adversary's special hatred against the Jews is further inflamed by the fact that Christ was a Jew. As Cardinal Lustiger has pointed out, the fundamental root of anti-Semitism on a spiritual level is hatred of Christ. Thus, the motivating fury behind the Holocaust was an almost pure outpouring of hell's hatred of God and hatred of Christ. In the Holocaust, this hatred was expressed in three ways: trying to eliminate Jews and Judaism, causing the Jews as much suffering, pain, anguish, and humiliation as humanly, or more precisely, diabolically possible, and finally by trying, one hopes unsuccessfully, to damn as many Jews as possible. For the concentration camps were not only designed to torture and kill the Jews, but they were also designed to dehumanize them, to wear down their moral resistance, and to cause them to act in ways that would offend God, either by rebelling against him or by committing suicide, which was a frequent occurrence at Auschwitz, primarily by throwing oneself against the electrified fence, or by succumbing to the instinct of self-preservation and acting out of pure selfishness with no regard for others. For the adversary wished not only to see the Jews suffer and die, but worse, to be damned. The witness of Cardinal Jean-Marie Lustiger. Earlier, we discussed the witness of the Lehman brothers as paragons of the faithful remnant, as Jews who embraced the Jewish Messiah and his church with all their heart, and with all their soul, and with all their might. Deuteronomy 6:5. Another, more recent, such witness is the current, when this book was written, Archbishop of Paris, Cardinal Jean-Marie Lustiger, who was born and raised Jewish in France under the Nazi occupation. In his book-length interview, Choosing God, Chosen by God, he touches on many of the themes addressed in this book. The following citations illustrate some of Lustiger's thoughts. on Nazism as anti-Christian paganism. As a child of 13, Lustiger spent the summer of 1937 in Germany, living with a Christian family. He relates his relationship with another boy, a Hitler youth, Hitlerjugend, who did not know that Lustiger was Jewish. He told me about St. John's Day, the summer solstice, the Aryan traditions of the Germans. It was clear to me that Nazism was the resurgence of the pagan and Goyim idolatries.